This story begins with spears pointing at the starry sky, on a battlefield where hundreds of soldiers screamed to capture the demon. Then a white-haired being appeared and he was too fast for any soldier. He attacked with his sword wrapped in a demonic aura, where hundreds of cuts appeared detonating overwhelming power. After such an explosion, he was breathless from such a fierce attack, seeing himself tired. When a woman complains about why he had made that decision. How had he made a deal with the devil? Had he betrayed them? Giving us the name of Knox von Reinhafer. He doesn't understand. Betrayal? He assumes that would be for them. However, he did not betray them, rather they were the ones who did. The woman only yells at him to come to his senses, demanding to know since when he was so broken. And we are returned to the past where an alert appears. He had completed the first part of Inner Lunatic, showing us a young man who visibly does not leave his house. He nods, saying that this time it wasn't so bad. He had also obtained many objects. He even discovered hidden missions. He was pleased with his performance. The only thing that worried him was that he would die the next month, saying that 2 years ago a doctor asked him not to panic, telling him that he had cancer and was terminally ill, giving him 2 years left of life, only being able to give him medication to relieve his pain. And that's how he lived until now, with no desire to do anything, only with medications that pressed his pain. Looking around, he felt lost, and at that moment he began to cough up blood, thinking that he would really die soon. But resigned assumes that he already knew, saying that he only received messages from hospitals. No one ever asked him how he was. No one approached him after his memory loss. Nor did he have anyone or anywhere to go to in the state that he was. All in his life was miserable. Everything had been taken from him. All that he could do was play the game Lunatic Inner, where he started a new game, choosing a new type of player for a change, choosing the ability, mana sensitivity and prodigious of the sword and combat. Then, an alert appears. If he chose his 2 special traits he would have a penalty, giving the trait, terminal illness. He smiled, thinking that if he was a terminally ill, why his character would not be. Pressing play. However, at that moment everything changed. His body had reacted differently. The protagonist feels that the day of his death had arrived sooner, feeling an infernal pain, falling to the ground believing he didn't have a good life. Then a window opens, synchronizing his character to himself, giving a completed configuration. At that moment a white-haired person wakes up, immediately recognizing the room, seeing his reflection, immediately understanding that he had become his character Knox Renhafer, telling that that being is from the 3rd family of the Dark Family branch, which is deeply related to the worst organization in this world, the Lunatics. He is the youngest of the 5 brothers in the Renhafer family. This family has had children who excelled in magic and swordsmanship for centuries. But Knox was the only one in the family who wasn't, so his entire family treated him with disdain for his lack of talent. Even in the game he signs a contract with the devil to be stronger and thus becomes a villain. Now the protagonist wonders if it was a dream, but in that his statistics appear, claiming in the game since they are very low, especially his stamina, which is only 2. This is due to his negative trait of a terminally ill person, which conditions his character, thinking that he made that character just to share his loneliness with at least one game. But now it seems like he's in real trouble. And just a message pops up. He greets him by his real name. He doesn't understand how he knows the name his parents gave him, which he doesn't even remember, wondering if he knows his past. He happily says that he had spent a long time without seeing him. He had done very well these last 2 years. He deserved to be there. That's why he welcomed him again. The protagonist doesn't understand anything, now known as Knox, receives the message that his previous world was not real, which seems absurd to him, but the computer assures him that it wants to help him. However, it cannot give him more details. The protagonist, distressed, tries to understand everything when the machine gives him an order to enroll in Eleden, a huge and prestigious academy where he must cultivate his power while approaching the main story, where he promises him that he will find the truth. This alters the protagonist, who tries to understand everything, looking at his reflection and seeing in his face to the final boss of the game Inner Lunatic, who will die after all this, but only if the main story continues. However, if he assumes everything is real, it may be the only option to get his memories back, so he decides that he will do it. He will get to the main story to look for a connection to his memories and try to survive. Clenching his fist with determination, he affirms that he will be the biggest villain. Smiling at that change, remembering how 1 year ago, when his illness was detected, his life became a macabre countdown between medications and the constant fear of dying. And now, in this new panorama, being in a world that he knows better than his own room. He decides to begin his journey, first by asking the system for the date, answering February 4th of 1812. Relieved to know the date, he is determined to prevent his death, confidently opening the doors to leave his room. But his negative attributes were activated, leaving him with severe pain from that simple movement. Finding his first problem in his fragile body, upset he walks around the mansion carelessly, which leads him to bump into a young maid whom he knocks down, causing her to break all the dishes. The girl, along with the other maids, are frightened by Knox's possible reaction to the bump, while he, being sword, sees the maid on the ground, recognizing her by her characteristics as Lorna. She, pained and on her knees, hurries to apologize. Knox minimizes her, considering her only a simple extra character and very gossipy, but surprised that a gossip has such a sweet face. Now playing the villain, Knox approaches her with a big smile, excusing her and warning her not to happen again, scaring the entire staff. With this, he understands that he is definitely in the role of villain. The other servants tell him that they are surprised to see him so early, and this confuses them even more when Knox claims he will go to the gym and take Lorna with him, making the maid feel in danger. Along the way, she even thinks that will be beaten with a wooden sword, while the protagonist thinks about how he was always on the edge of the death. And now he has the chances of surviving. He must adapt to the situation, saying out loud that it is impossible, scaring the confused maid even more. The protagonist returns to his internal dialogue, remembering that he won the same game 27 times, so he knows all the hidden objects and stops to open the skills window. Remembering the great fandom of the games, which is very loved for the large number of possible combinations of attributes, including the gifted or genius categories, which allow you to ascend quickly, but they are limited to one, since if he exceeds he will receive a penalty just like him. He is a martial arts and mana detection genius, which increases his magical sensitivity, but he must deal with a penalty, a lifetime limited to 1 year, a weakness that will make him faint frequently, slow growth in attributes and cold hands and feet. Lorna follows him closely as he analyzes how to solve all his problems, eventually arriving at the gym where he stops with a wistful look, which is noticed by the maid. Finally, Knox, determined, opens the door with his first mission in mind, freeing himself from the curse of weakness. He begins his training brandishing his sword, but falls unconscious after performing less than 10 movements, surrendering to his weakness, resting for a while until he gets back up to admire the good maintenance of the weapons from the ground. Weapons are fundamental to the Reinhafer family, represented by a silver shield, and the house is remembered by a phrase, the home of darkness and the sword. This due to its distinctive skill, the fencing of vision, which gives the dark attribute to a sword so that it can cut its enemies, as the famous Black Sword warrior did in the past, the supreme conqueror, whose sword is inherited by a selected member of the family from generation to generation. Although it is impossible for him to inherit it, so he prefers to think about his true advantage, money, since he comes from such a rich family that they don't care about what the youngest son does or spends the money. After all, his character is a spoiled child who always gets his way. So decided, he gets off the ground, and the maid lets him know that his request was ready. As he approaches to the wooden sword, the protagonist calls the girl, who fears being beaten, but only receives a whisper in her ear. She reacts violently, since what he asks will cost him a lot of money. The protagonist decides to convince her with a kind smile, followed by a verbal threat to obey, and she accepts and leaves scared. Knox is left alone while tea is being poured, thinking that if he does everything he will manage to end his weakness. And yet he feels a presence behind him, who is called Lord Knox. The protagonist recognizes him as Lord Rodwell of Enranoki, the butler in charge of the house that serves his father, the head of the family, Theo von Reinhafer. His presence makes him nervous, making him tremble as he tries to think of how to handle the situation. Fortunately, the butler is only here to convey news. He must attend dinner tonight. This is not convenient for the protagonist, who, acting like a spoiled child, tries to get away, but the butler tells him that he has a guest, the young girl from the Stellinger family, who will attend for a lesson in chivalry. Therefore, his father will be angry if his youngest child is not present. With no other option, he decides to go. Even so, the butler's gaze remains on him, saying that he is acting very strangely. Knox, confused, asks him why. Rodwell answers that it's because he had never shown interest in wielding his sword or training. The new Knox, acting coldly, warns him not to use that as an excuse to take him to his father, since they don't care what he does or doesn't do. And so he leaves. The butler apologizes, but will remain suspicious. In this way, the protagonist returns to his room, still shaking, worried that the possession will be discovered. But his biggest concern is the red-haired girl who is approaching. The glory of the Stelliner, a new problem, and these also increased by his twin brothers Hats and Alan, who are upset by the inferential arrival of their little brother, and annoy him with a rumor of having insulted a poor butler and a maid. Knox tries to keep his composure, though he feels guilty for the insults he didn't even say. And everything is interrupted by the maid that announces the arrival of the other attendees. Theo, his father, and behind him Talia von Stalliner, a red-haired girl who enters radiant and happy. The father announces that he will have her as a guest while she receives chivalry lessons. All this happens under Knox's gaze. Who knows that that woman will end up driving a sword through his heart? Introducing his antagonist in the game, called Talia. A surprised Theo observes with astonishment how Knox presents himself at the banquet, which even catches the attention of the redhead who did not expect to see him there either. In this way begins the banquet that takes place between the twins and Knox, who tell their father that it is time to decide who will go to Eliten Academy. The father knew they were right, so he starts thinking. Meanwhile, Knox remembers that the academy is the basis of the game, whose plot revolves around cadets who face demons. Therefore, Knox must enter while maintaining the main story of the game. For that he needs allies. Theo mentions that all noble families only have 3 positions in the academy and his family had already used 2. So there was only 1 left available, which will be resolved with the classic family method, a fight. Knox gets involved, to everyone's surprise. Theo, seeing this, agrees to the fight in a month at the gym. The twins incite Knox to surrender, since with his condition he is already defeated. The protagonist calmly and elegantly responds that that is a statement that could only be made if they managed to defeat him. All this while drinking wine and loudly claiming that he will enter the academy. This arouses the surprise of his father, the fury of the twins, and the interest of Talia, who watches him with a big smile, which scares the protagonist since it was not convenient for him to be near her. And so the night came and Rodwell reported Knox's sudden change. The boss confirms, saying that if he hadn't been there he wouldn't have believed it, even thinking that he might be possessed. However, even if that were the case, he was intrigued and decides to wait and see where it takes him. While Knox begins his preparation running under the gaze and opinions of all the service personnel, who doesn't have much faith in him. The protagonist didn't understand why he listened to those things if he didn't have that power. But then he continues his training, managing to increase his stamina, although it only reaches a 0.1. Worried, since his sword genie ability only activates with a stamina of 4. Something somewhat difficult to achieve for a normal player. But for someone cursed like him it was almost impossible. Also, he had to do this in less than a month. That's why he will have to increase exponentially, which is very difficult because his curse limits his growth. But that's why he was determined to work twice as hard, running and running until he almost died, having to deal also with the poor health that his limited time leaves him. But he would worry about that another day. For the moment he had to continue training. And so Lorna arrives with his order. The protagonist's happy and somewhat villainous attitude returns by approaching the items that the maid brought, most of which are poisons except one, the growth scroll. The protagonist explains to the girl that although they are poisons, it all depends on how they are used, so he will prove it by drinking the 3-headed snake's poison bottle, which alters her. The protagonist, the half-dizzy, sees his health increase as a countdown begins. Lorna, worried, wants to go get the butler, but Knox stops her by telling her to calm down while he devours, like an apple, the golem's core. This scares the maid even more. The core quickly takes effect, which makes Knox happy, since thanks to this the poisonous effects are counteracted, activating the hidden peace effect. The golem's core increases its defense, petrifying the user. But when consumed together with the poison of 3-headed snake, the latter is diluted, making part of its weakness disappear. Continuing like this and experimenting with a worried maid who thinks her boss is going to meet God. However, it is quite the opposite and the protagonist begins to undress in front of her, who observes with eyes almost closed. Lorna, with her face reddened, watches as the protagonist pours water from the fairy spring on himself, in a somewhat suggestive way, which also eliminates the effect of the golem core, achieving the effect of hidden peace again. This leaves him with a smile of great satisfaction, especially when he gets the growth benefit skill that doubles speed of growth. Now he only needs to use the stamina increase scroll, which also doubles the growth speed, managing to stop the curse for the moment, now being able to level up. Lorna, on the other hand, approaches screaming, worried about him, since she thought that his sensual modeling from before was due to the poison being damaging his brain, a comment that the protagonist lets pass because he was happy for his achievement. The worried maid asks the protagonist what he will do now. He answers that he run, so he begins his training again accompanied by his reliable maid. At the distance, Talia and her wardrobe assistant Emma are watching him. The redhead, annoyed, watches Nox's training, considering him a weak inept who shouldn't have taken the fight. Emma suggests her not to insult him, as he is the son of the owner of the house. Talia continues with her complaints, seeing how the protagonist just runs like a fool without even practicing a little with the sword. Even though that in the corridors of the house offered to train him, she knows that only a sure beating awaits him, without understanding his feelings or why he cares so much. She goes encouraged to introduce herself to Nox, who is resting on the floor with his maid fainted behind. There the redhead greets him with a big smile, while Nox, as coldly as possible, asks her what she was looking for. Talia, surprised by such coldness, assumes that perhaps she made him nervous with her beauty, which Nox simply ignores. The girl changes her attitude and very seriously tells him that if he does not train with the sword he will not win the fight. So the redhead offers to help him defeat his older brothers. He acts very coldly, immediately rejects and leaves, which leaves Talia furious at how he treated her when she only offered her help, leaving with a push. As Lorna observes how her boss is hated by women, Nox is confused as Lorna calls him a rascal, and the protagonist decides to review Talia's stats, which are very good. She dominates the fire element, has a lot of charm with positive characteristics such as admiration of heroes, honesty, and is a genius with the sword. However, as a negative characteristic, she has an undeveloped feeling of inferiority, although Nox does not pay attention to the latter, given that he focuses only on the incredible stamina of 5, surpassing an ordinary adult man. Also, although she is not the strongest sword genie, but one that exceeds the lower level, she also has the attribute of fire, which in the future will evolve to create a powerful white flame, with which she will burn alive the character of Nox, that is, now the protagonist. Unfortunately for him, she cannot be an ally, as she would alter the story of the game too much, and it is better to keep his distance from who in the future will kill him. As Talia walks sadly down the hall, remembering how her teachers congratulated her on her quick learning, being recognized as a talent worthy of her family. This brings back the memory of how she sees her older sister as someone beyond her abilities. This fills her with sadness, so she grips her sword tightly, wondering if she can really be a worthy knight. In that world, being a knight means being austere, not suffering from greed and sacrificing for justice. In addition to learning many fencing techniques, honestly, she thinks back to Nox, who has no chance of beating those they've trained for years. Thus comes training day, where Nox and Alan are in the arena in the sight of everyone, especially Priscilla, the twins' mother, but not Nox's. Also present are Teo and Rodwell, to whom Teo asks the difficult question of what he thinks about the duel. Rodwell replies that the winner will be Alan, being surprised that Teo seems to think differently, as he knows that even though Nox behaves differently, to win he will need more practice and training. Without any of those, the only way he could win would be with a natural talent so great that they doubt Nox possesses it, and anyone else in the world. Teo still had faith in him. After all, Nox comes from the Reinhafer family and he trusts that he can have talent to rival the great masters. Meanwhile, Nox remembers how the day before, despite all his effort, he only achieved a 3.8 endurance. Resting, his favorite maid expressed how tired she was from running with him, but the protagonist with a big smile felt that it wasn't fun that she didn't do it with him, which makes maid pout and the training continued. But the protagonist's curiosity is so great that he decides to see the abilities of Lorna, who with the same training already has 4.5 of stamina, which makes him stop, annoyed by the genetic disadvantage of that family. Lorna catched up with him and told him that he should rest since the next day would be the duel. And so we return to the present, where Alan suggests to his little brother to surrender before he will hit him so hard that it would impress Talia. The protagonist watching Alan had a health of 8.00 and a lot of interest in showing off, understanding that he will not be able to win with conventional methods. The moment becomes tense when the referee indicates that who loses had to accept the result without dispute. If Nox lost, he would lose his last chance to regain his memories, and in a single year it would all be over. The referee starts the fight. Nox launches himself head-on, but when Alan receives him with a blow, Nox dodges it by throwing himself to the ground, then blocks a strong blow that sends him backwards. His brother didn't wait long to follow his attack, while Nox just blocked, thinking that he will lose everything if he fails. But then his health increases by 0.1, with only one more left to unlock his ability. Nox tells himself that he can do it. Alan looks at him like he's crazy and decides to put him in his place, while Teo's first wife watches him calmly, assuring that Nox has no chance. This would ensure that her son is the one who goes to the academy and in the future becomes the head of the family. Teo feels disappointed by Nox's pathetic performance, and Rodwell suggests he to stop the match or he will suffer too much damage. Meanwhile, the protagonist remains trapped, resisting and acknowledging that his brother has decent talent, but far behind the best ones, especially from Garen, the master of the Black Sword, who leaves his enemies so frightened that they surrender. Just as Teo gets up to stop the fight, Nox feels how his health increases by 0.1 again, running through his entire body. At that moment his ability activates and he smiles as sparks begin to pop around him. Under his father's stare, Nox activates the genie's time ability, which creates a gigantic shield of light and covers him with an aura. Everything around him moves slowly. Determined, he grabs his sword, brandishing it to disarm his brother, who cannot believe what was happening, while Nox, with a confident look, assures that he will win the fight. The sword was flying in the air. Alan was holding his injured wrist, seeing how Nox approached with a confident attitude. Although deep down he knows he can't trust himself, because the ability that gives him advantage can only be used for 5 minutes and he must finish the fight in that time. Changing his attitude to a more haughty one, expressing to his brother that he has been holding back until now, but he had already bored of the match, so he invites them to a 2 versus 1. This suits him, since if he doesn't defeat them in 5 minutes, he will lose. And Nox formally requests Teo to make it official. Rodwell and Talia don't understand what he is doing, as his father watches him, intrigued to see that he still has tricks up his sleeve and deciding to allow the 2 versus 1. Despite his wife's complaints, the fight begins. Hats takes his sword and stands together with his brother Alan, angry at being humiliated in front of their father, determined to attack. As the protagonist awaits them with a big confident smile, the twins launch with all the attacks, but they are easily blocked. And the brothers seem to want to coordinate to attack as a team. But the protagonist moves quickly while he dodges and blocks, when the system tells him that his dark sword ability has increased. Confidently, he makes a movement so fast that he disappears in sight of the twins, who can only feel a strong blow on his arms. Nox appears in the center of the battlefield, smiling at the surprise of everyone present, including Talia. The protagonist sees his rivals again, finding them with a completely different expression, hesitant, even beginning to argue among themselves. Nox takes advantage of this to continue attacking, beginning to push them back, thinking that although the combat is important, he has not stopped having fun. Before everyone's astonished looks, one of the twins backs away, falling to the ground next to his brother, with both on the ground without a chance to stand up. Right there, the protagonist's ability ends, just in time to confidently say that the fight has ended, asking for the result, declaring him the winner. To the annoyance of the twins' mother, the brothers accept the result without options, while Teo and his son exchange looks of respect. This is how Nox, with a final bow, prepares to leave the arena, when Talia, desperate, runs after him. Now out of everyone's sight, we see how Nox ends up too exhausted and coughing up blood from overusing his abilities, saying that that ability was temporary, but at the same time it can also cause him to lose his life, specifically 2 days of life permanently, recognizing it as a good and bad buff. At least he feels satisfied that the effect didn't occur earlier, because his admission to the academy would have been in danger. But Talia's voice is heard approaching, very worried, asking him if he was injured by the fight. He feels that his plan could be in danger, asking her not say anything to his father. However, the girl really congratulates him for winning that fight at a disadvantage with such a damaged body. Nervous, she claims that she has misunderstood him, blushing and approaching as she remembers how for a month she saw an inept practicing with a wooden sword. And now seeing him win, she understands that he has a hidden talent and wants to know how to awaken him too. However, seeing him after the fight, with his lonely look, she understands that Nox is not an inept, but someone who really strives to win. Now really worried, Talia wants to understand him, but before she touches him, Nox stops her hand, yelling at her not to touch him. The real Nox admits in his mind that being a terminally ill person who is only obsessed with games, he is not very good at interacting with girls, and even worse with a character who is going to burn him in the future. But Talia is not bothered. Rather very sorry, she apologizes to him. This leaves the protagonist surprised who hears her apologizing. Understanding that the fact that he only did stamina exercise was to counteract his birth weakness. And that is why she asks him for forgiveness for thinking that he was acting like a useless person. The confused protagonist does not know what to respond, seeing her as a girl with the characteristic honesty of a gentleman, but with a great pride, which must make it difficult for her to admit her mistake. So he simply asks her to keep the secret of the bleeding, to which she agrees, seeing how the protagonist goes, telling her that it is a promise, leaving the girl blush. Meanwhile, Teo is proud of his son's talent talking to Rodwell, who was still confused by the beating he let himself get in the beginning, but also believing that the skill with which he won would be enough to rank him among the best young swordmasters. Teo nodded, assuming that Nox was still hiding things, and sent his butler to keep an eye on him without intervening. Thinking to himself, if his son could be the next heir to the Black Sword, that is a title he hopes to find out in the little time he has left. Trusting Rodwell to find out. While in his room, Nox sees how even though this world is now real, the game system remains the same, and he receives a reward for winning his first match. 3 free points, which had been very useful for him to avoid his month of training, but now he wouldn't need them in stamina, but in luck, the only attribute that cannot be trained and the most important for the game. He then decides it's time to try his luck. So in a kind of magic gachapo, he spins it around, hoping that with his increased luck they will get an advanced ability in the form of a scroll, which can be normal rank for lower skills, silver for intermediate level, gold for higher, and more advanced than that, an iris hue, wishing for an advanced level or higher. And his luck helps him by giving him a golden scroll that grants him the ability, Supreme Ruler's Awe, which means that against enemies lower than their stats, they receive a 20% debuff with this new skill. All that remains is to decide what you will use your single-use skill voucher for. Thinking about reserving it for the reunion of all the family siblings. Thinking that the graduation from the Academy Eliten has surely already occurred, remembering Grion von Reinhafer, the second son of the family, who will also bring him problems in his search for an important family piece. His only peace of mind is that he no longer has to worry for Talia, confident that he will not break his promise and there was no reason for her to approach him. Or at least that's what he thought for a couple of hours, until the girl appears in front of him again, confronting him this time to know how he became so strong in such a short time. But Nox, without giving her importance, continues his way, and tells him that she has already seen him train secretly during that month. This saddens the girl, but she doesn't give up and insists him to teach her how to train. Seeing her insistence, Nox remembers something about Talia's character card. She wants to be recognized by her sister, so he looks at her and he tells her that before asking him she should think about how talented she is, leaving her speechless. Nox, without knowing how to comfort someone, gives her a cheerful look and tells her that she shouldn't compare herself to others, leaving her blush. While he walks, still nervous about Talia following him, he realizes that it is not convenient for him being seen in his search for the family piece. From afar he sees his father with the whole family gathered in the barn, famous for raising the best horses. The father had gathered his children to choose his equine companion that will accompany them forever. In that world, horses are considered sacred companions and are for life. Apart from being necessary for riding classes at the academy and for the last stretch of the games that involves great wars, where a way of transportation will be essential, not as expensive as teleportation magic, which makes everything seem unnecessarily realistic. Decided to choose the best horse, Nox is rewarded by his father for winning the duel, allowing him to choose first by entering the cavalry. Seeing many cute horses, approaching a gray horse, his chosen one, this surprises everyone. Even his father offers him another chance, hinting that he might be making a mistake. But when looking at the horse's statistics, Nox realizes that it is a high rank. The horse belongs to the obsidian category, making him extremely rare and a great choice even for his father, if it weren't for the fact that he has a negative trait called expected death, which only gives him 2 days of life. Still, Nox decides to continue with that horse, confident that his knowledge can save him. For Teo, it is a bad decision, assuming that his son is projecting himself onto the horse, seeing it as a pathetic feeling and a disappointment, warning him that he hopes he doesn't regret it, and walking away, leaving the twins surprised that he won't stick around to see their choice. Rodwell tells Nox that he must name the horse, and he christens it Carl, the name he used when he was a player. They both end up in Nox's room, where they had to do something no one else could see. Although looking into the horse's eyes he reminds his own, with that spark that indicates the desire to live. So he begins his plan by calling Lorna, who was eavesdropping from outside the room. Entering in a somewhat clumsy manner, she ends up back on the ground, surprised to be caught. Knox only thinks about why the maid is always falling. But the important thing now is that he puts her in charge of taking care of the horse, which bothers her because she is only in charge of cleaning the room. However, Knox convinces her, although in his mind he thinks that what is about to happen could be a shock to her, not knowing if she could handle it, as she seems to be getting attached to the horse. 3 days later, Lorna, crying, screams to Knox that Carl had died. The protagonist observes her calmly and with some sadness, remembering that the maid worked hard to take care of the horse. That's why he asks her to control herself since she distracts him, but she insists that Carl had left them. Knox, with confidence, assures her that he will bring him back, which makes Lorna think he's crazy again. He just tells her to stand behind him, while he takes out a scroll, which he injects with mana, creating a large purple rune on the ground. The rune goes out, and Lorna is surprised to see that he can use mana, thinking that maybe what he is doing is illegal. Knox suggests that she keep quiet if she wants to avoid Carl dying a second time because of her. The girl obeys while Knox concentrates, knowing that he hasn't unlocked his genie ability of mana detection yet, but remembers that what he is doing is indeed illegal, since anyone under 15 is prohibited from using mana, except those of the imperial family, who are much more competent in magic due to the advantage of understanding the world from a very young age. As for Knox, he can only inject as much mana as he can into the scroll, until he reaches a point where he injects his one-time use skill bonus, activating his black magic to use the ability of the Book of the Undead, Necronomicon. With this ability he will be able to revive Carl, saying that in this world there are two kinds of undead, those resurrected by black magic, or dark mana, and those who are revived without it, resurrecting as beings 1,000 times stronger. In any case, these will be loyal to their masters forever. The problem is that no one but the dark family of wizards, the manhwas, should be able to use skills to revive and control undead. Although Knox's family is of dark category, they can only be knights, so using one of these skills should not be possible. But with its one-time use bonus, Knox manages to use the Necronomicon, and so the dark energies begin to envelop them both. Knox feels a lot of pressure, bleeding from his mouth, which worries Lorna. He silences her, since there is little left. Although his mana is running out, it seems that he is going to give in. Until after being enveloped by the shadows, Carl stands up, neighing loudly, before the sight of Knox, who now sees him as a large imposing horse, with a mane of fire, successfully activating the skill. A worried Lorna approaches, while Knox checks Carl's abilities, seeing that his negative trait has disappeared. Satisfied, he tells the horse that he will be its master. At that moment Lorna rushes to hug them both, worried about Knox due to the reckless use of mana, and about Carl, who does not accept the scolding, thus starting an argument between the maid and the zombie horse. Now happy, the protagonist thinks about his next move, to look for the piece, so a few days later, in the dark of the night, he decides to look for it. With his map he easily finds a shiny rock, to continue his way in search of a special piece of his family, which seems to be a rain, which will be useful to him to combat his time limit. So he continues on his way to a place, where he is afraid to enter, since in theory that is now his real world, and not a game. As he reads the warning sign, he realizes that he is about to enter a cursed forest, where he could die. The protagonist enters the forest of the missing girl, where he must clear everything or die. This is a forbidden place due to its dense fog, which can confuse anyone no matter how skilled they are, making everyone get lost as if they were children. But that is not the real difficulty. It is the monsters that present the greatest challenge. If an adult faces them, they will not get rewards and their difficulty will increase, making it very difficult to fight them. The protagonist admits that in the game he died many times before deciphering it, rating it with 2.5 stars out of 5 in difficulty. In his past life he actually did it just to learn, not knowing what items were obtained in that scenario. Luckily he did, since it's perfect to combat his terminal illness. So he starts by lighting a huge torch that illuminates the terrain, and takes his first step, following the smoke or rather the opposite direction to it. In this way he begins to search in that direction, detecting something, to which he tells her to stop hiding. Receiving no answer, he decides to attack with his sword. But we go back a little earlier, with Talia, still upset because her beauty had no effect on Knox, which has her very obsessed. Emma is very worried about that obsession, since she could also get a scolding. However, the redhead assures her that she will not lose her job, which does not reassure her at all. Emma then reflects that Talia is so respected that she could be the next arcade mother of the family if it were not for her sister Cher. But that is no reason to be impatient, since she cannot do anything else. And so she assumes that Talia gave up and went to sleep. However, when she gets to the room, she does not find anyone, and trembles with fear, thinking that she went after the protagonist. So she wakes up the entire staff to look for her. Returning to the forest, Knox stops before attacking, discovering who was following him. asking her if what she was doing there. But before she answers, Nox gets in front of her to protect her from a huge gray wolf in a forest full of these. The redhead realizes and only has a dagger to defend herself. These wolves do not notice it at first, since they only begin to communicate with each other. Nox launches himself on the closest one, finishing him off easily, which leaves Talia surprised. He very seriously asks her why she followed him, since he assumed that if anyone did, it would be his brothers. The girl, still with her role as an innocent girl, suggests that she was just taking a night walk. With that answer, Nox impatiently decides to leave her alone. Talia took him by the arm, upset, beginning to explain that she thought about how strong Nox had become. Suddenly, when she saw him sneaking out of the mansion, and decided to follow him to that forest without thinking much about it. This relieves the protagonist, knowing 3 things. That Talia thinks well of him, that she doesn't want to kill him, and she's a little girl who doesn't understand how dangerous it is to follow someone in the forest. With no other options, being a main character, he can't leave her behind. So using his arrogant attitude, he clarifies to Talia that he's not looking to help her. He just wants to prevent his family's reputation from being damaged if something happens to her, leaving her embarrassed. Nox thinks that with that level of contempt, she won't be anything dangerous again, but she rather shows herself grateful, surprising him. She is about to say something important, when suddenly hundreds of wolves appear, interrupting the moment. Talia, scared, becomes very attached to the protagonist, who leaves her because he knows that she will get in the way when fighting. Thinking that even with that delay, he must follow his plan, aware that he has not yet entered the main story. So he only continues in a prologue, where no final boss will appear, but a kind of evolution of the Grey Wolf, the elite Grey Wolf. Although he admits that as much as he knows what is coming, that does not mean it will be easy. And the wolves launch themselves against him, but are received by the forces of his sword, not retreating, aware that they are not cornering him. Cutting a few, he can remember how when he was Joe-chan, playing the game, he always repeated to himself that he was a damn weakling. Meanwhile, Talia watches him in admiration, after seeing all the wolves he's defeated. Assuming he hasn't brought out his full power yet, like in the gym fight. Feeling that the prota sees her as a burden, since she can only drive the wolves away with fire. And the battle continues, with the arrival of the elite Grey Wolf. Back on the outskirts of the forest, a group is searching for the boys, finding their tracks, going deeper into the forest. The staff is very worried that they've really decided to go in, especially Emma, who wants to go in immediately for Talia. But Rodwell stops her, since that's a forest that not even the Reinhafer family has cleared yet. The butler recognizes that being one of the strongest dark families in the south, admitting that not cleaning a forest is synonymous with incompetence. Which is why they have never announced it. Also, the fact that only children can enter and clean the forest has not been announced from the town either. He does not understand why Nox entered the forest, since he does not believe that he was attracted by a mind-controlling monster, nor by another person who crossed the barrier. And with the caution that it seems that he entered, he comes to the conclusion that he entered intentionally. Rodwell in that way must admit that Nox is no longer the fragile master that he was, accepting that the only way for them to get out of there is for the young master to use all his wisdom. At this, Emma falls to the ground on her knees crying, thinking that it was she who caused Talia's death. Meanwhile, Talia was still in the forest, now taking out her dagger to defend herself. Nox, at least seeing her concentrated, is calm, warning her not to attack if it is not necessary. However, the protagonist only thinks that Talia could be useful, since finishing off a Grey Wolf is not that complicated, and she has learned well to defend herself. Despite this, he cannot consider her to cover his back, therefore he must clear the place quickly, activating his ability Genius Hour. But a wolf does not waste time and runs straight towards him, holding the protagonist, who receives it with a direct cut. This causes the wolves to stop, until the elite wolf sends more of his troops to surround the protagonist, who begins to cut him more easily. However, one passes by his point if it is, and runs straight to his back. With no chance to react, Nox only sees how dagger pierces the wolf at the last second. This was Talia, who was yelling at him to take care of himself. She, on top of the tree, thinks about Nox's words when he told her to run away if the situation would become dangerous, something that she bravely did not want to do, leaving the protagonist surprised. He looks at her while she asks him if he was okay. Still in shock for having received help, the protagonist observes her until he feels an enemy, and finishes it with a single movement, knowing that he should not be confident. So he tells Talia that he was fine, which makes her feel relieved. He thinks that he has shown his most pathetic side, and tries to remain focused, but his hands begin to shake. The debuff is coming, and he still has to take care of the elite wolf. It gets closer and closer, stalking its prey, until looking directly at it, it launches itself at full speed. The protagonist waits for it in front, when the wolf changes its direction at the last second and passes by his side, making a cut in his arm and then hiding in the density of the forest. Talia worries, and Nox is also very worried, thinking that this is much more complicated than in the game. With a cunning wolf that took him by surprise, since the elite wolf not only controls the others, but also takes advantage of the terrain. So now he must get serious, predicting the wolf's movement and throwing a blow. However, the wolf dodges easily, noticing that it is a trap to create an opening. Now he was unbalanced, added to the fact that his body causes him so much pain that he spits blood from the debuff. With no chance to react, he sees how the wolf's large fangs approach him. Thinking about how he was too confident for having passed the game so many times before, believing that he could handle everything they threw at him, this being a very foolish idea for someone like him. Luckily, before the wolf devours his face, a dagger is stuck in his eye. Nox, surprised, notices how thanks to Talia, an opening has been created, so he launches himself, piercing the elite canine, killing him. Without any more strength, Nox is unable to pull his sword out of the wolf, falling to the ground, spitting blood, before a worried Talia, who quickly jumps from the tree to help him. He looks at her with a smile and begins to thank her for helping him, but is cut off in the middle of the sentence, remembering that she will end up exterminating him in the future, so he returns to his cold attitude. She, with tears in her eyes, insists on asking him if he is okay with his wound. Upon hearing that he was okay, Talia feels more relieved, until she feels something on her arm, a spider, which she seems to have a great phobia of, screaming loudly. The protagonist becomes alert, thinking that another monster appeared, but he only sees how Talia throws herself into his arms. A very scared Talia says that there is a spider, clinging even tighter to an uncomfortable Nox, surprised by her fear of spiders, and wonders why she followed him into the forest, if she is afraid of something so small, so he gets rid of her, and tells the redhead that he has little faith in her as a knight. This makes Talia pout, and pushes him. And when Talia regains her composure, the protagonist coughs up blood again. Nox pretends to be fine, since he couldn't tell her, but he was very grateful for helping him survive. As he recovers, he tells her that they must leave the forest, which begins to light up. Outside, Emma continues crying for Talia, and Rodwell is also very worried about the problems that this will bring between the families, added to the bad reputation that she has for not being able to clear that forest before. But everyone is surprised when the fog of the forest begins to disperse, while a gigantic wave of bright mana rises before everyone present, implying that the forest has been clear. To everyone's surprise, Nox and Talia come out of the forest. Rodwell sees them while smiling, as he has confirmed that the hierarchy in the offspring has just changed in favor of the protagonist, who just sees all the cavalry, thinking that they were really worried about Talia, who quickly receives a strong hug from Emma. Rodwell also approaches to tell her that his family is also very worried, which makes him think that the Dark family is softening if they worry about a useless like him. Emma continues crying in Talia's arms, until her attitude changes from concern to anger, lifting her with one hand to tell her that he will reprimand her, reminding her of the family rules. Nox in the distance notices the great strength of that maid, remembering the absent-minded Lorna. Emma tells him that she will give the reprimand to her father, then thanks Nox for taking care of Talia. He claims that he was not trying to take care of her, which makes Talia feel like a burden, until the protagonist assures her that she had taken very good care of herself. Then the protagonist is resting because of what happened and then moves on to the important thing. The hidden piece, an accessory that he won when clearing the forest. This ring increases his resistance and mana, with a great special effect, which grants him part of the life force of the enemies he defeats, this being greater depending on the rank of the enemy. With this he plans to extend his life, although it will not be for long, since he will barely be able to steal small amounts of energy, being difficult to overcome the disease, but he remains calm to at least have a minimum of hope to continue fighting. And when he puts it in his hand, he calls Lorna, who is spying on him outside the room. She enters clumsily as always, thinking that the protagonist can see through the walls, and seeing her disbelief, he gives her a zap, and now he wanted them to have a fight. She accepts, even betting her salary decrease. The very calm maid prepares, but is easily defeated, so she goes into desperate mode that does not lower her salary. But as Lorna is very fond of gossip and the protagonist's reputation is not very noble, he does not care about those things. Smiling, he gloats in his victory until karma charges him the activation of his negative trait, causing a fractured wrist and flu. With this he changes his mind about Lorna's salary and instead asks her for some ice. She immediately notices that Nox is sick, but he tells her that she should just rest. Meanwhile, something from within the system seems to be watching him, knowing his true identity. And so 6 months pass, with Carl and the ring in his possession. Both hidden pieces that he has not even been able to use, since he is grounded. The punishment is unfair according to him, because clearing the forest should have been for a reward. Even Lorna agreed, but she could not say anything against the patriarch for her salary. Nox explains that he is the one who controls her salary. While the maid complains, Nox feels that time is passing, and with the announcement of the few days he has left, he decides to go talk to his father. But Rodwell arrives to tell him that Theo is looking for him. And we see a flashback of Theo when he was young, and he was standing on a battlefield, where a great massacre occurred. While hundreds of flying demons approached, the patriarch used his dark sword to attack angrily. The disastrous day is recognized by Theo, who seems to be sinking into darkness, until he opens his eyes, remembering that one of those days, one of his children must learn to use the black sword, and he needs it to be someone of pure talent, and it must be soon, because that person will also have to send him to the other world. But those thoughts are interrupted by his butler, who tells him that Nox will arrive soon. The patriarch is upset by the delay, thinking about his son's feat in clearing the forest, something that even he could not figure out how to do, which is why he deserved a reward. But the vassals had opposed it, ordering an investigation on Nox, in which it is confirmed that he was the one who cleaned the forest. Right after Nox arrives greeting with respect, the patriarch, without wasting time, tells him that his actions were not correct. However, it is his duty to reward those who deserve it, so the reward will be a request. Nox, confused, having never seen Theo give a reward, is afraid that it is a trap. He tells him that he can make a request, whatever it is. Although if it is something too exaggerated, he will reconsider his offer. Nox affirms that he will not ask for anything strange, but that he must think about it. Theo accepted, leaving him free. The next day at the door of the mansion, Talia says goodbye to Nox, telling him that she will see him again at the academy. He tries to ignore her. Talia repeats her words, continuing with the same game, until Rodwell tells her that she must answer the lady. Nox, instead of answering kindly, tells her that he will see her only if she becomes a complete knight, ceasing to be afraid of spiders. Talia only hit him. Annoyed, she assures him that she will see him again, being a complete knight, telling him to prepare himself, to which the protagonist understands as a death threat, until Emma interrupts him to thank him for saving Talia. Nox, still with his cold attitude, affirms that he never had the intention of saving her, and that they should leave at once. As the carriage drives away, Nox seems to feel some nostalgia, feeling that he is liking her new life, which just reminds him that he only has 146 days to live it, having no time to rest. Days later, Lorna tells Nox that she must hire new staff, just when Rodwell arrives to introduce him to an assistant sent from the Eliden Academy. This will be his exclusive maid, Lavilla. The protagonist recognizes her, seeing her file, and she had good stats, being a support genius. The negative thing is that she is two-faced, an expert liar and spy, whose current occupation is to keep the protagonist under surveillance under the orders of her father. Then he thought he only had 140 days to live. Time seems to be going very fast. Although he has managed to improve his stats, now he is very close to entering the academy. While Lorna fixes his clothes, asking him if he is nervous about his school life, he just thinks that he is happy, because that way he will leave her alone. Lorna pretends to cry, saying that she will miss him, but is happy when he tells her that he will not touch her salary, which annoys him. However, he has no time to intimidate her, since if he does not raise his stats, he will not survive in the academy. Reflecting on the thought that he will meet the best cadets in the country, and must survive to advance to the next point in the story, and try to maintain his role as a villain. After seeing the arrival of Lavilla, he knows that he will now be watched by her. Nox remembers how Theo has risen so high, not only because of his mastery with his sword, but also because of his ability to distrust everyone, and we see Lavilla prostrate in front of an imposing patriarch, who tells her that he has high expectations about her mission. She will position herself very well in the line of succession of his family. Lavilla swears to help Nox wholeheartedly, but upon perceiving Theo's aura, she notices that he does not want her to help him, but to watch him and report all his movements. And so Lavilla remember how Theo made it clear to her that she must not forget who her true master is.